During a conversation with someone in 2018, a television segment came up and they couldn't stop talking about how great a new act was. Jericho had an interaction and pulled out a piece of paper while shouting,
"You just made the list!" Oh no!
The person I was talking to found it hilarious and said it had been working for a while and everyone loved it.
Say something funny again, boy. Say something funny.
I'm not trying to be funny.
I'm done.
While I am being told this, my mind is racing. The list of Jericho would turn into one of the biggest gimmicks of the past 10 years and made a lot of moments for the wrestling world all the way up to leading to a WrestleMania match. But there was a huge problem for me with everything I was hearing, and that problem was that I had seen this gimmick before, but now I needed to know where.
Hey, do you see the list? Have you seen the list, huh? Where's the list?
I ain't seen the list, man.
I want the list, not breathing! Where's the list?
To get it out of the way, everything in wrestling, it seems, is borrowed from one person or another. What makes this one stand out to me is how when I saw it, the list was on such a smaller scale than it would be seen by for the rest of the world. Wrestling is also much bigger now than it was back then. Everyone didn't quite know everyone, but everyone knew someone who knew whoever they didn't. The odds of a gimmick like this just showing up didn't seem coincidental to me. So periodically over the course of the last several years, I have looked into it once a month or so, trying to find some kind of lead on if I had seen it or was I simply mistaken. After exhausting my own collections, the first stop was Brian Turner's VHS Rehab. He has tons of obscure stuff, and I thought I may find it there, but no luck. I remembered it was around the area of Mr. Hartgrave, so I asked him if he had anything I could check out to see if I saw something. This search wasn't going very well at all, and at a point I was beginning to think this may simply be me misremembering things from years past. My searches slowed down, and I had all but given up really thinking it was a findable thing. I can't tell you why, but this search stuck with me for years. But with all of the leads drying up, I was slowly thinking that maybe this was a waste of a search. Perhaps it was time to finally move on. The channel had began its new era, and I was going through videos and old audio on the computer to remake the ones that had been taken down previously. One of them would be about Steve Corino. While combing through audio, something unexpected would happen.
Up until I got hurt a couple weeks ago, I really could have my curses down to 20 a day. I like this first 15 minutes, I sound like Jim Cornette. But yeah, it's like I'm sitting there and like there's people that piss me off, and I try to write them on my list and be done with it. And like that's great for like, all right, it's on my list, then I can let the anger go. I try to write them on my list. All right, it's on my list, then I can let the anger go. I try to write them on my list.
This was what I had been looking for. That was the list, and it was being talked about in the early 2000s. There were still a few problems. For one, it was not Corino that I remembered doing the gimmick, but this was still good, because at least a lead was there again. The other bit of bad news was that this was just a clip. I didn't have the full interview, and it was only audio, so no visual indicators of what I was looking for. I wasn't able to let the opportunity of this new lead go, and so I began combing through interviews I had of him around the time period. If there is one thing that can be said about Steve in the early 2000s, it's that he did plenty of shoot interviews. Unfortunately, this would make the search quite expansive. I would decide it was best to try to space it out and listen to an interview every few days and see what I came up with. After about 3 months, I was not making much progress and running out of sources. I listened back and noticed one thing about the clip I hadn't before. In the clip, you can hear a chuckle from someone, and if you know who did the interviews back then, they all had pretty distinctive voices. My guess from hearing what little I did of their voice was that it was from the straight shooting series Ring of Honor had made, and sure enough, Carino had worked with them. Now, the only hang-up was finding a copy of that, and after asking around, Dr. Brian Wright from Wrestling Soup was able to help out with this request with an assist from Jack Frost. With the interview in tow, we now just had to give it a listen and find out if he expands on the list.
Yeah, so my big problem with TNA at that point was, I go up to the trainer, I said, hey look, head's fine, I'll clean it out at the hotel. Can you clean my back out because I can't reach? Looks like a surface wound. I don't give a shit if it's a lesion. Can you clean it out? Nah, just take a shower, you'll be fine. Now there's no showers at the asylum. You have to go back to the motel, wherever motel we were staying at. By the time I get there, this thing, there's pieces of board and stuff like this stuck in my back. 2 days later, it's infected. I have to have a doctor cut it out. So that doctor in Nashville's on my list right now. Yeah. So whenever Bill Barron says, hey, would you like to come back to TNA? Is that trainer still there? He's on my list. It was a $60 bill. I'm bringing the bill to him too.
That was it. It was the only other mention of the list in the interview. This was only slightly crushing, but I knew there had to be something out there. Getting this far had inspired me to keep the search going. I just had to keep my wits and stay on the course, and surely I would find what I was looking for. Unfortunately, a new development would take place as in 2023 wrestling news sites began to report that Jimmy Jacobs had given the list to Jericho because he was inspired by Steve Carino's list. When wrestling journalists have caught up to where you are, then you know you are miles behind of where you should be, so I doubled down on my efforts. If the true origin was going to be found, it had to be done fast before the new story took hold and couldn't be changed in the minds of the masses. The search was going strong, but was somewhat sidelined after the Feinstein video. His constant flagging and escapades were quite distracting for those few months, but it did bring in an influx of people, and many of them have been very helpful in the Discord. One such name is a guy who goes by Rhodes Scholar. He was very helpful and always willing to lend a hand in searches. I spoke to him about what was going on, and he was very interested and realized how big of a deal it was, especially with the news sites making their recent reports. At the same time, I threw out another request to the good doctor from Wrestling Soup. I was going to need look through a certain kind of interview, and I was hoping he would be able to come through, so I made the call.
Oh, hell yeah, I got you, man. I keep those right over here.
With another set of interviews, I sat down to continue searching while days turned to weeks. The search was coming to a conclusion as I only had a few tapes left to look over, and at this point, I had become a Steve Carino historian. When it was beginning to seem like I may need to figure out a new plan, suddenly while listening with a few other people, something happened.
What is the list? A fucking asshole that he is. No, like it. The list is a funny thing that a guy named Cool Cat, I don't even know what this guy's real name is. Right. He's a friend of Guillotine LeGrand's, and started this thing called The List. And I think Tommy Dreamer is the original guy on the list because he hated Tommy Dreamer's promos. And just one night he's like, you know what? Tommy Dreamer's on my list. And he pulls out this piece of paper and he writes Tommy Dreamer down. He goes, I can't stand him, and he's on my list. And it was the funniest thing. And then Charlie started, and then we all started. And it was like this thing like, oh, that guy, he's on my list. And it's a funny thing, like, you don't like somebody, you go, yeah, that fucking asshole, you're on my list. And what's great is you can do it in, like, restaurants, like a bad waiter. Right. And you go up to the guy and you pull out your list, and I don't have it anymore. But you pull out your list, you're like, what's your name? And you're like, the guy, Tim, spell that out. You write your name, you're on my list. You just put the thing, it's more of like a Seinfeld thing to do. So it's a lot of fun, but a lot of people take it like, you know, this list, I wonder what the hell's wrong with this list. It's just a fun thing. Cool. And you can't come off, like Charlie's rule was, you either had to give him a blowjob or die to be on this list. Now there's 822 men on his list.
There it was, the list, where it came from and how, just sitting right there. Steve Carino had got it from his friends Charlie and Cool Cat. This was a huge leap forward and pretty much where I concluded. I was happy with it and made a post to let everyone know I was working on the video. I went back to Road Scholar to tell him what I had found out, and he gave me an interesting reply. I didn't know how or why, but he was going to see Steve Carino somewhere over the weekend, and this was the perfect timing and opportunity. If this would ever get solved, I had to at least try to get something from the guy himself with this being offered to me. I would be a fool not to, so I threw some questions at Road Scholar and hoped for the best. He'd done it. We were finally going to get this sorted out straight from the source. So I threw on the video and awaited my answer.
So, Steve Carino, we were in the home of Steve Carino. You want to jump in there? You're welcome to.
Beck knows about the list, right?
So Beck,
Jericho.
Beck Carino joins us. So for Grapple Vision, Steve Carino presents The List.
The list. Yeah, so for years...
Orion Carino.
Grandson. Yeah, for years I had a written list and wrote it down, you know, because I'm not a very angry person. I felt like it was very therapeutic. And even though some people thought it was weird. Did you think it was weird?
What?
The list.
I think it's weird.
I think I'll spank your bum with this thing. Yeah, so I used it and everything like that, and then one day it was on WWE TV, and I thought, hey, I do a list too. And then eventually, you know, I meet Jericho, who I never met before, even though we're from the same city. And he said, oh, you're the guy with the list. I go, how did you know it was me? He's like, well, Jimmy Jacobs came up with this idea. And he wanted something outrageous and something like that. And he goes, hey, I got this buddy that does this list. But I don't know why I get credit for it, because it was Gaetano Legrand's list first, the originator. So apparently, like Jericho, I owes him tons of money.
How much money would you say? Just a ballpark.
Oh my God, right? Right? He makes in a year what I make in ever. So yeah, and it was successful. Did you see any of this money?
So none of the money, none of the gimmick. I learned of it after the fact, but I'm in talks with an attorney right now.
Well, you shouldn't be. I work for the company.
Too bad, too late.
In a twist to end all twists, the guy who I had sent to ask Steve Carino about the list was in fact the man who came up with the entire thing. I'm not sure there is a way to really describe how much this answer surprised me, but it was right up there with finding out that a cheetah sounds like this.
So the list, and I'm not just saying this because he's filming, it's from one Chuck Gaetano Legrand, who got it off a Simpsons episode.
Alrighty, Colonel Save, you just made the list.
And I want to say we were in the Limerick Diner. And the first time you ever pulled out the list was because the milkshake machine was down after a WWF show. and you got mad at the waitress.
This isn't true. You go on. Go on.
No, wait. Where did you first present the list to me?
I know that person is not on my list. Whoever you're talking about. Who do you think I put on my list?
Oh, there's a lot of people you put on.
Look, I was hot about the milkshake machine, but I don't think that was list worthy.
Really? Yeah. And I asked you what you were doing, and you had said like when somebody gets you and Cool Cat. You had a game where instead of getting mad at someone, you just put their name on a list. And then you would put the actual paper back in your wallet, and I thought, this is absolutely phenomenal. And
I'm sure this was someone in the locker room that night going on my list, but that's fine.
Was it the first night we met?
No.
Was it ECW?
No.
Probably ECW.
No.
Oh,
we probably were.
Dimension, wasn't
We
it?
probably were at Limerick Diner. It was probably one of those nights.
Yeah, probably payday was low.
This video's already too long and
Anyway,
off topic.
sorry.
In his day, Chuck LeGrand was a North American champion with 0-1, as well as a veteran of the Puerto Rico territory. He worked shows up and down the East Coast and would become a traveling buddy of Carino. He would have a hell of a run in wrestling that would see him travel the world and even referee some bouts of Riki Choshu and the great Shinya Hashimoto. He was a guy who had always been around but never got many looks. I think this may be the most satisfying conclusion to the search because it teaches a lesson to us about overlooking those men in wrestling's auxiliary roles. When watching a match of Chuck's or even seeing him referee a bout, it's safe to say that most fans would never assume he had come up with one of the most successful ideas of the last 20 years. While searching, there was a quote from Steve about 20 years ago that would sum things up nicely and in a strange way proved itself true.
It's just always a shame because I wish Chuck LeGrand had the in-ring talent that Teddy Hart did because Chuck's such a great mind. Man, so many guys could, he could be a superstar. He could be with Vince and doing stuff with Vince every Monday night.